Okay. We're going to get underway, folks. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. FreedomFest Court is now in session for the trial of the century. The Mayor of Los Angeles, the Honorable Oscar Goodman, is presiding at this hearing. All rise. Everybody. Where is Your Honor? Your Honor, Your Honor. Oh, this will slow things down.
He's coming.
Oh. What did I say? Oh, the Mayor of Las Vegas. My tongue is getting tied. The Mayor of Las Vegas. Whoa. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Judge, we're delighted you could make it.
Thank you. I have my bailiff here as well. Roger, throw this bailiff in the can, Mayor of Los Angeles. Forget about it. Take him away. All right, everybody be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're gathered here in this great sovereign state of Nevada to decide the fate of our economy in the trial of the century. In this hearing, we hope to discover those responsible for the financial crisis our great nation has gone through, the worst financial collapse since the Great Depression that has affected us all, even us in the great city of Las Vegas, the entertainment capital of the world. Before this court, the prosecution accuses free market capitalism and its co-defendants deregulation, tax cuts, unregulated laissez-faire, and other forms of supply-side Reaganomics as the principal cause of the high crimes of financial collapse of commercial banks, insurance companies, and real estate investment trusts, massive losses in 401k and pension plans, the highest unemployment rate in decades, and pain and suffering of average citizens throughout the world. Now, that's just the indictment.
That's the full 5-minute opening statement.
We're not there yet. You better watch yourself. We brought before this court Mr. Stephen Moore, one of the premier members of the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, who is the foremost exponent of supply-side policies of free market capitalism. Mr. Moore, please stand before the jury. You and your supporters have been accused of multifarious high crimes against humanity. How do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
You don't have to say it so loud. Have a seat, Mr. Moore. We'll begin these proceedings with 5-minute opening statements. First, by the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Jeffrey Madrick. Mr. Madrick is a professor of economics at the New School of Social Research in New York City, the editor-in-chief of Challenge magazine, and the author of The Case for Big Government. After his opening statement, Mr. Moore will be given the opportunity to make an opening statement. You may reserve it, sir, until after the prosecution rests their case. Mr. Moore is a co-author of the book, The End of Prosperity, and after the opening statements, each attorney will call 2 witnesses who will be subject to cross-examination. Then each side will make closing arguments. So, where's my jury? Oh. Where did they find this jury? This is a jury of nobody's peers. Did you pay to get in here? Let me give you a few instructions, ladies and gentlemen. You'll listen carefully to the opening statements and the witnesses, and at the end of the hearing, you will be required to determine whether there is sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Moore and his supply-side free marketers are responsible for the financial crisis this country has suffered. Is that understood? Say you yes, one and all? Yes. All right. Now, Mr. Madrick, behave yourself. You may make your opening statement.
Thank you, Judge. It's a pleasure to be here, Judge. Thank you. And it's great to see all my friends out in this gallery. I appreciate all of you, or at least one of you coming. As to the jury, it's great to see you. Typically, an attorney gets the opportunity to interview each of you, as you well know. And you know that too, right, Judge? You know that I did not have
Don't ask me
that
questions, Mr. Madrick. Make your opening statement.
I just want to be sure. I haven't had that opportunity, but I know you will be able to put, just looking at you, to put all past prejudices, views, biases aside and view this argument as independently as possible, because that's your task, even though you applauded for Mr. Steve Moore. Now, I want you to know, jury, that I have a lot of sympathy for capitalism. Capitalism is dynamic, it's full of energy, it's critical to the prosperity of every nation since the Industrial Revolution. Nobody wants to put capitalism asunder. But capitalism is also like an adolescent. It's proven that throughout the history of capitalism. It's an adolescent that needs supervision, it needs guidance, and it needs nourishment. And I hear that you agree with me. Without that guide, we've gone through 30 years of reducing that guidance, that supervision, and that nourishment. And I will argue that's led to the catastrophe we face today. 10% unemployment. A banking system that we thought was the pride of America, that's now insolvent. The pride of the world, in fact. That's now basically insolvent, except that it was saved by government recently. I could go on and on.
No, you
Retail
can't.
Sales.
No, you can't.
Retail,
You're reaching your 5 minutes, Mr. Madrick.
Retail sales even recently kept going down. So we're in some trouble here. What will you be told by the defense? You will be told what you've heard time and again. It wasn't capitalism. It wasn't unguided capitalism. It was government that did it. It was government that told those brilliant investment bankers and commercial bankers to invest in risky securities they did not understand. It was government who told the banking system to set up a compensation system that rewarded people not to manage risk, but to take too much risk. It was government that told people in all these new mortgage brokers, sell mortgages to people who could not possibly understand them, even when you can't understand them, because you'll make a lot of money on it. And I can go on and on, as you well know.
No, you can't go on and on. You're using up your 5 minutes.
You'll be told, I can go on, and I'm not going to go on and on, Judge. You will be told some other things. You'll be told a fanciful story about how America grew up in its early days because there was little government, laissez-faire. It's untrue. Even under Thomas Jefferson, there were serious rules and regulations about, for example, the sale of property. The key to the American story, accessible, cheap property, highly regulated by the federal government. The federal government built, the state governments built the canals. They built the primary schools. They built the sanitation systems in your cities, which allowed cities to grow plague-free and become great sources of economic growth. They built your high schools. They did all kinds of R&D. Give me just...
I can't. We're running a tight ship.
You can tell me I have 30 seconds left.
Yeah, 15 seconds left.
I will prove today that capitalism didn't work, that the advocates who tell you the price system and competition always adjust, always reduce excess, greed, and adjust the system to work efficiently and to maximize prosperity, did not do so in this case. Capitalism is important, but it needs supervision, guidance, and nourishment. It does not nourish itself. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Madrick. We appreciate that. Would juror number 1 please wake up? Mr. Moore, do you wish to make your opening statement at this time?
I do, Your
All right,
Honor.
very good.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would submit to you that it is not free market capitalism that should be on trial this evening. It's socialism. It's big governmentism. It's compassionate conservatism. It's Chris Dodd. It's Barney Frank. It's Ben Bernanke. It's Hank Paulson. It's the people. Your Honor, it is the people who moved away from the free market system that have created this crisis.
If I hear any more outbursts like that, I'm going to put Mr. Moore in jail.
The people who moved this country away from the free market system are the people who are responsible for this crisis. Now, let me submit to you all that there is one reason that the United States has become the richest country in the history of the world. And it is because of the free market capitalist system, and we should not apologize for that. The times in our nation's history when our economy has faltered have been times when we have moved away from free market capitalism and towards socialism and big government. And I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that, for example, it was in the 1930s when we had a massive New Deal experiment in big government. It was a failure in every regard. The size of the government doubled during the New Deal. 8 years after Franklin Roosevelt was elected president and implemented his big government New Deal policies, the unemployment rate was still 15% in the United States. The New Deal was not a success. It was a failure because we abandoned free markets. Now let's talk about the current crisis. Is this a crisis of the free market system not working? No, I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it was the result of big government policies, and in fact, big government republicanism that helped create this crisis. The federal government grew by a record pace under George Bush and the Republicans in Congress. They abandoned the principles they believed in. And then let's talk about what happened to the money supply. We had a massive expansion in the money supply and a massive devaluation of our currency in the period from 2001 to 2007. The price of gold went from $300 to $900 an ounce. We debased our currency, and no country has ever become rich by debasing its currency. Now, I would submit to you all, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that the way out of this crisis is not these big government bailouts, not the big government stimulus plans, not the $9 trillion debt plan that Barack Obama has submitted and has passed, but it will be a return to the free market policies. It was Ronald Reagan who turned around our economy the last time we were in a great economic crisis, and he turned around our economy through free trade, through low taxes, through limited government. We have to return to the policies that work. We know that when we let the engine of free enterprise work, that America prospers like no other country ever has. There has never been a time, ladies and gentlemen, when big government, either in the United States or any place in the world, and I would challenge Jeff Madrick to point to any example in history where big government made people richer. Big government is what makes people poor, and it turns countries into impoverished nations. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Mr. Madrick, you may call your first witness.
I do call my first witness, and I think, I lost my script. I think it's Charles Gasparino. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Thank you for standing at my back. Thank you.
Would Charles Gasparino please come before the court?
Wait a second, Mr. Gasparino. Don't talk to the jury and try to convince them. Marshal, one more move like that, Mr. Gasparino, you won't be allowed to testify. You'll be in the can. I promise you that.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes. All right. Just stand there and tell the truth.
And you have to tell the truth to me and the jury, Charles. Mr. Gasparino, thanks so much. Was there greed exhibited on Wall Street in the last decade?
Yes.
What?
Excuse me, I have to give him the mic.
You want to use my mic, Mr. Gasparino?
Charles.
Here. I will take the gavel, though.
Thanks.
Yes,
Let me ask that again.
Yes,
was there greed on Wall Street?
There was some amount of greed.
How did it manifest itself?
Well, as it always does. You know, people want to make more money. People cut corners. And in doing so, greed leads to excess.
And how much money did people make?
They made a lot of money.
For example?
Jimmy Kane made $40 million in 2006. Stan O'Neill made $50 million in 2006. This is right before the whole thing hit the fan.
And how well did their companies do as a consequence of that compensation?
In 2007, Merrill Lynch was nearly bankrupt. In 2007, Bear Stearns nearly went bankrupt in the middle of 2007, and actually did. There was a run on the bank in early 2008.
Now explain to me how you think capitalism is supposed to work. We believe that people should make whatever they can make because they are managing their companies well, creating useful products, contributing to the prosperity of America. Kane, O'Neill made enormous amounts of money compared to what most of us make. Their companies went bad. What happened?
I won't be able to get back in my hotel room.
Was capitalism working?
I think it was, to a certain extent. I mean, you can't regulate out greed. I think that's what you want to do. You want to prevent greed. If you want to prevent greed, you got to essentially kill everybody on the planet, because it's a basic human instinct. Some of us have more of it than others. Some of us, and that causes us to do stupid things. But if you want to regulate greed, good luck. You'll need a bigger government than Barack Obama ever envisioned.
Do you think that the compensation system contributed to bad decision making?
Absolutely, yes, it did. It did.
So you don't think there is a way to regulate bad decision making on Wall Street that has to do with some of this?
Well, the way to do that is, I guess, to have government involved, where you have, for example, if we're talking about the free market, what do you think gave us Fannie and Freddie? And by the way, how much do you think Franklin Raines was paid right before an accounting scandal? I think it was something like $20 million. Now, this is a government-regulated agency that paid I could call him a perpetrator because I believe he was cited by the SEC. That paid a guy that involved an accounting scandal $20 million. And by the way, did not put to death either Fannie or Freddie during these scandals. Allowed them to continue in their ways until they nearly bankrupted
Gasparino.
Nothing
Mr.
like
Madrick, your time is running short here, so please answer
on
his
Fannie
question.
and Freddie,
answer
Fannie
Mr.
and Freddie
Gasparino.
were made private corporations, weren't they? They were made to
They're regulated
act like the market.
they're regulated by the Housing and Urban Development Administration.
They were
under the Clinton administration, which
made,
forced Fannie and Freddie for the first time ever to start guaranteeing subprime loans.
So
yes, you're
Judge,
right.
I may have to ask you. I may have to do this with both my witnesses to treat this witness as a hostile witness.
Mr. Madrick.
I am not surprised in this
No, Mr.
environment.
Madrick, the only problem is you're 5 minutes too late.
Okay. Are we out?
30 seconds, okay?
Let me ask you
and
this,
you may lead
Charles.
him.
Should these investment bankers, why weren't they able to assess the prices of these securities they bought so aggressively? What went wrong?
Why weren't they? Well,
let me continue this because this is my last question. Isn't the capitalist system supposed to work through competition to adjust prices in a way that we don't get outsized, crazy behavior that lasts for years? It's okay to say, we have to allow some exceptions, but for years.
Sir, I would tell you that the cure is worse than the disease. If you look at history, there have been bubbles throughout the history of mankind. It's all about human nature. You can't regulate it out. If you want to regulate out economic bubbles, and you basically go back to what you had in the Soviet Union, that type of economy. And if you want to regulate it even less lightly than that, go to Europe and welcome 15 to 20% unemployment.
No difference between U.S. regulation and the Federal Reserve and the SEC and the Soviet Union in your mind?
I'm telling you, if you want to regulate out greed, you want to regulate out bubbles and financial
All right,
manias,
you're becoming repetitive.
You will get the Soviet
Mr.
Union.
Madrick, thank you very much. Mr. Gasparino, you're subject to cross-examination. Mr. Moore, would you like to examine?
Mr. Gasparino,
Yes,
it's good
sir.
to see you, sir. You seem to be very
I'm sure of
bothered.
that.
You're starting to scare me now.
You seem to be very bothered by some of these high executive salaries that some of these CEOs were paid.
I'm not bothered. I'm just stating the facts, sir.
Do you have any idea how much money LeBron James makes every year?
I don't care how much money he makes.
Would it surprise you to know he makes $40 million a year?
My father made $40,000.
Do you have-
I'm sorry.
Do you have any idea how much? Do you know how much money Hannah Montana makes every year? Would it surprise you to know
If I said yes,
Would it surprise you, sir?
I should be in the game.
Would it surprise you, sir, to know that she makes over $50 million a year?
Right.
Now,
She didn't blow up the economy.
Let me ask you a question.
Mr. Moore, don't ask him how much the mayor of Las Vegas.
Now, here's my question to you, sir.
Right.
Can we agree that someone who runs a major company with thousands, if not tens of thousands of employees, who has oversight over billions, if not tens of billions of dollars, if that company is well managed and makes a profit for the shareholders, do you have a problem, sir, with that person making as much money as Hannah Montana makes, and A-Rod and LeBron James?
Are you saying that Stan O'Neill well managed his company? Are you saying Jimmy Kane was a great CEO?
No, I'm asking for the CEOs who make. No, I am not here to defend CEOs who ran their companies to the ground. I think that they should
Mr.
be
Moore,
ousted.
you're here to defend yourself.
What I'm asking you is, why do we go? Don't you believe, sir, that it should be the boards of directors and the shareholders, not members of Congress, who determine what the salaries are of these companies? After all, the shareholders are the owners of the company, right?
Of course, but you forget one little piece here, Mr. Moore. The government is a shareholder right now.
Well, that's the whole problem, right? That's the whole problem. All right,
But they needed to be a shareholder to bail them out. See, I can play both sides of the story. It's sick.
This is a squealy witness. All right, let me move on.
This is why people don't trust me.
Let me ask you a little bit about the housing crisis, sir, because you're an expert on this.
Yes, sir.
Now, would you agree with the premise that the housing sector in America is one of the most subsidized and regulated sectors of the U.S. economy?
Absolutely subsidized by various tax incentives, regulated left and right. There's 15 agencies that probably watch over the whole system.
So this is hardly a free market system in housing, is it? I mean, we've got all of these institutions, from the tax deduction for housing, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Federal Housing Administration, that are pumping money into what became a bubble.
Absolutely right.
So may I submit to you, sir, that it was the government intervention in the housing, not the free market system, that caused this bubble in housing?
I think you're asking for a very simplistic answer, and it's not that simplistic, because here's what you had. You had a confluence of issues. You did have something known as securitization, right? And that was caused a lot by deregulation in the housing business. And you did have government prodding them along. You couldn't have a bubble without the free market. You couldn't have the bubble without government.
Do you agree, though, that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac played a central role in the housing bubble, sir?
A substantive role.
Okay.
All right,
one more question, if I may,
question.
sir. You're an expert on markets, and I want to ask you this question, sir, and I want an honest answer, please. Do you believe the United States government can run the car companies in America?
No, I don't.
Thank you. I rest.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Gasparino. You may step down. Mr. Madrick. Mr. Madrick, please call your second witness. Mr. Madrick. Please call your second witness.
Where's the bailiff?
I'm right here. It's John Mackey of Whole Foods.
Thank you.
Will John Mackey please come up and face the court? Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I always tell the truth, although it usually gets me in trouble.
We probably promised to get you into trouble, Mr. Mackey. But let me ask you about executive compensation. Give me some idea, give the jurors some idea of how executive compensation has soared in the recent era.
Yeah, it really has soared. Historically, if you go back to 1965, the average Fortune 500 CEO made 24 times the average pay of their workers. By the 1980, that had grown to 40 times. By the year 2000, it had grown to 300 times. The average Fortune 500 CEO makes 225% the average compensation of CEOs in the other 13 largest industrial nations. So it seems like there's something wrong there.
Has that shown up in equivalently improved performance in corporations? In other words, executives make 6 times more as a proportion of average workers than they did 30, 40 years ago. Are companies 6 times as well managed?
Until 2007, they appeared to be.
What do you think that all that executive compensation helped improve management of companies?
No, I don't.
Could it have hurt management?
Yes, it could have hurt it.
Could you explain to the jurors how it could have hurt with all your experience?
Well, in my opinion, in my experience, if the CEO is paid too much, unlike, say, LeBron James, it demoralizes the rest of the organization. That you're part of a team, you're part of a larger culture, and if a few people are taking disproportionate amounts of money compared to everyone else, then it could be bad for the overall organization.
Do you understand why people who are always defending CEO salaries are always talking about athletes like LeBron James who unambiguously prove their worth and their merit compared to many CEOs? Why do they talk about athletes all the time?
Well, because athletes are very well paid, so it's sort of, by comparison, it seems more reasonable.
Is it reasonable?
I mean, a good CEO is worth quite a bit of money. But you have to, I make a distinction, or it's important to realize that you have to worry about what the external equity is, what a CEO is worth in the marketplace. But you also have to be concerned about internal equity, what they're worth relative to everyone else in the organization. And a good company pays attention to both and strikes a balance. I think somehow we've gotten out of balance over the last 30 or 40 years.
I don't know, because I haven't asked you, but are you worried that sometimes this compensation leads to short-term decision-making as opposed to longer-term strategic decision-making for companies?
I think that has happened in some instances, yes.
Is that, on balance, good or bad for America?
Bad.
So there can be some downside to this kind of compensation, clearly.
Absolutely.
Do you suspect that's what happened in the financial community in the last 5 or 10 years?
Yes.
Do you have, again, I didn't ask you this before, but do you have any ideas in mind? Could Stan O'Neill making $50 million or $160 million to drive Merrill Lynch under Kane, not to mention all the people under Kane, some of whom made more money at Bear Stearns than Kane did? Does that upset you as a man who's built a brilliant business and worked his proverbial rear end off to build that business? Does it upset you?
No, it doesn't upset me. It's not how I choose to run Whole Foods Market, but it's not my responsibility, or I question its responsibility of government, but it is responsibility of the board of directors and the shareholders to make sure that those excesses are held in check.
Mr. Madrick, you have any other questions?
One last. Free market advocates like Milton Friedman argue competition will hold these in check. He'll allow that occasionally it'll get out of hand, but competition will hold excesses in check over time. In my view, they haven't. Do you think there's something awry in that ideological attitude about markets?
I don't think the problem here is markets so much as it's we need reforms in corporate governance. I don't think boards of directors and shareholders are doing their job appropriately.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Moore, do you have any cross-examination?
Sir, I just want to be clear on this, and thank you so much for being here. You're one of America's great entrepreneurs. If I understand you correctly, absolutely. If I understand correctly, you're making the case that boards of directors and shareholders have been derelict in their duty, well, especially the boards who set compensation. This is not a failure of the free market system, is it? It's a failure of the duty of the compensation boards. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay, well, I don't see how then this has anything to do with an indictment of the free market system. Now, let me ask you this, sir. When did you start your company? What year was that?
1978.
1978. What are your sales this year?
About $8 billion.
Say again?
$8 billion.
$8 billion. You're an incredible American success story. Sir, there are many countries in the world that do not have free market capitalist systems. North Korea, Brazil, Ethiopia, Russia. Do you believe, sir, that you could have created an $8 billion company in a nation that does not have a free market capitalist system?
No.
I rest.
All right, thank you very much. Wait a second, Mr. Mackey. Mr. Mackey. Mr. Mackey, before you're excused, I'm going to take the prerogative as a judge to ask you a question, all right? Or a series of questions. You are the CEO and chairman of Whole Foods, are you not?
Yes.
What would it take for the mayor of Las Vegas to get a Whole Foods in his downtown? And be careful before you answer the question.
Well, Whole Foods doesn't take government. We refuse to take government payoffs, so that won't work.
Where's my marshal?
You'll have to turn the economy around, sir.
You're bordering on contempt here. You're bordering on contempt.
I recommend cutting taxes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Madrick, do you have any other witnesses at this time?
I do not, thank you.
All right, does the prosecution rest then?
The prosecution necessarily rests.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Moore, do you have any witnesses you want to call?
Well, Your Honor, I don't even feel I need witnesses after this travesty
Fine,
of a
then we'll
trial
end the
against
case.
free market capitalism. But I would like to call the great and esteemed publisher of Forbes magazine, Steve Forbes.
Very good.
You're a juror.
Mr. Forbes, would you please place your left hand there, raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Keep the mic.
Steve, it's great to see you.
Well, please don't be familiar. Call him Mr. Forbes, will you please? Jury, ignore this, that last outburst, all right?
May I question my witness, sir?
I'm not so sure.
All right.
Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Forbes, Steve, you and your father have built one of the great publishing dynasties in American history. I'd like to ask you the same question that I just asked the previous witness. Do you believe that you and your father could have built the dynasty that you have? What were your sales, sir, in the last fiscal year?
They weren't as high as the year before, thanks to government meddling in the economy. But to answer your question, in no other economy other than a free market entrepreneurial economy could Forbes have survived. Not just in the commercial sense, but what we write about people. But
Sir,
we will say good things about the mayor. I want to get out of here alive.
Thank you,
Sir.
Mr. Forbes. Thank you, Steve.
So I'll call him not Oscar, the Oscar prize.
Sir, we have seen a great financial collapse in this country over the last 9 months. The prosecution is trying to make the case that this is a result of the failure of free market economics. Can you point out some examples, sir, of where you believe it was actually the failure of government intervention, either in housing policy or regulatory policy and monetary policy, that created the crisis where we actually deviated away from the free market system?
Yes, there is no way we could have had a bubble in housing of the size that we did and all the other things that have happened if the Federal Reserve had kept a strong and stable dollar. If it had, and the printing of too much money, the excess liquidity, the artificially lowering the price of capital led to a disaster, just as those kind of policies led in the 1970s. So that's primary villain number one. That's government. Fannie and Freddie, in a 2-year period, underwrote, guaranteed $1 trillion of junk mortgages. Those were government-sponsored enterprises, and Congress thwarted every attempt to make a reform. When the crisis hit, it was the SEC overseeing accounting that allowed the regulators and auditors to put in this crazy mark-to-market accounting that devastated bank balance sheets and turned a flood into a tsunami. If we'd had those, Mr. Moore, in the early 1990s or early 80s when we last had banking crises, we'd have had the disaster that we had in the recent months. And then I won't even mention short selling, removing the road bumps on short selling, not enforcing the rules against naked short selling. You have to borrow shares before you sell them. That, again, was a failure of government, not free enterprise. So when you have those kind of government mistakes, make no mistake, you're going to have a disaster. Whether it happened in Wall Street, housing, or elsewhere, excess money and those kind of derelictions, you will get a disaster.
Sir, may I ask you your motto on your plane and your other, what do you call your the motto at Forbes magazine?
Capitalist tool.
Capitalist tool. And
Yes.
you say that unapologetically, sir?
Absolutely. Entrepreneurial free markets. And remember, capitalism didn't invent human nature.
Let me ask you this
So
question.
the bottom line, there's no other system. And precisely because, Mr. Moore, this system was invented not by government, not by philosophers. They came after the fact. It was spontaneous. It allowed to happen, and that's why it works.
Two last quick questions. First, is there any truth, sir, to the allegation by the prosecution that tax cuts for the rich caused this economic crisis?
The tax cuts of the early part of this decade, 2003, just as the tax cuts of the 1980s, the Kennedy tax cuts of the 1960s, by lowering the price of productive work, risk-taking, and success, enabled the economy to flourish in each of those periods of time.
What happened to revenues?
Revenues actually went up, not down. When you create a vibrant economy, wealth is created, jobs are created, incomes grow, and guess what? Government gets a cut
So
of it,
there is
too.
no evidence, sir, that the tax cuts under Bush or Reagan or Kennedy caused the budget deficits.
It's like saying you get a $10,000 raise and you spend $20,000. No, that is not a crisis of revenue. That is a spending problem. Congress needs to have the credit card taken away, and we'd have a surplus.
One last question, sir. One last question, please. To cement my case,
Mr.
sir.
Moore,
To cement my case, sir.
This is the fourth last question.
Just a yes or no answer to
Fair
this last
enough.
question. You've witnessed, Mr. Forbes, what has happened in the last 3 months with bailout plans, with stimulus plans, with debt, with a $10 trillion budget. Do you believe, sir, that there's any chance that these policies will cause an economic recovery?
It will not, to use the fashionable word today, cause a sustainable economic recovery. It didn't work for us in the 30s, didn't work for Japan in the 90s, won't work for us today. No.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Madrick, we'd like to cross-examine.
Thank you, Judge. And Mr. Forbes, thanks for being here. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Are
We
there
are
any-
neighbors, even if on the opposite side, but anyway.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Any great companies in Sweden? Any great business enterprises in Sweden? Or France? Or Germany?
There are
Italy?
great enterprises all around the world, except for perhaps North Korea. But the key question is not just a handful of great enterprises. The key question is how many small businesses are created? How many jobs are created in the private sector?
You don't think there are jobs created in those countries?
There are jobs created, but if you look at the facts over the last 25, 30 years, in the private sector, the United States proportionally has created far more jobs than have been created in Western Europe and Scandinavia.
Do you know, and please tell the jurors, what has the median wage of male workers done in the last 30 or 40 years since since President Reagan was president?
Well, if you actually count the real world wages and not some of the ways that government count wages and the way government deals with statistics, the standard of living in the United States has increased enormously. Only those who look at government statistics would actually believe that a working American today has a lower or the same standard of living 30 years ago, whether it's health care, education, quality of life, quality of housing, quality of cars, you name it, it's better today than it was 30 years ago.
Just so the jury knows, I know we don't, when we disagree with government statistics.
And by the way, on
please,
when we
Sorry.
disagree with government statistics, we don't want to look at them. When we agree with them, we do want to cite them. The median wage of male workers is lower after inflation today than when it was before. And let me point this out and ask you a question. There were always new products in America, weren't there, Mr. Forbes? But when there were new products, at least in fact, the recent period can't come close to comparing to the new products of the 1920s in terms of distribution. 1 out of 5 families owned a car in 1919. 3 out of 5 owned an automobile in 1929. And real wages measured by the government, who in this particular case we don't like, measured by the government, real wages went up when there were all those new products, talkies, Victrolas, electric refrigerators.
Mr. Forbes, do you understand the question?
There's a question. You know the question. Shall I ask a question, Judge?
I think that's what cross-examination
Median wages
is.
are down over this period. There are new products. Median wages went up over the entire course of American history over 20 and 30-year periods, and not this time around. Why is it different this time around again? Just tell the jurors, please.
All right. The 1920s were a fabulously productive, innovative decade. And it worked because of the tax cuts that we had in the 1920s and a sound money policy. In 1929, we made a series of catastrophic errors in 30-31 that gave us the Great Depression. So that was government. Private sector worked in the 20s. In terms of your median wage, first of all, the government survey concentrates on those who actually make reports to the government. It misses out on new companies. So it's a flawed survey. If you actually look at tax returns, and the IRS did a study that came out a few years ago of people earning what they earned in the mid-1990s and what they earned in 2004, and actual tax returns showed that people's income went up, particularly those in the bottom fifth, that almost all of them, the vast majority, went up not only in terms of actual wages, but also in terms proportionately moving up a quintile or 2 quintiles. So in that sense, I'll rely on another government, the IRS, the tax returns, rather than a faulty survey that hasn't been updated in 30 years.
I must say, I never thought I would hear a Forbes say he relied on the IRS. We are choosing our statistics, aren't we? But let me ask you a couple of other quick questions. You're talking about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. What proportion of subprime loans did they buy? Let's say, I wrote it down. In 2006, they created this crisis. What proportion did they buy and Wall Street didn't buy?
In terms of what Fannie Mae ended up guaranteeing, it ended up
subprime.
I know subprime mortgages and what they call Alt-A mortgages ended up, you don't look at just their numbers, it actually exceeded $1 trillion. Now, Wall Street wrote this stuff, and Fannie Mae guaranteed it. However, again, this couldn't have happened if the Federal Reserve hadn't done what it did to create that excess liquidity.
Just to let you know, Fannie Mae bought 20% of subprime mortgages. And
they bought them. However, those were mortgages, I think, that they kept on their books. They started to drink the Kool-Aid, too, and keep this stuff because they thought it was a way of enhancing their profits.
Mr. Madrick is badgering my witness.
Mr. Moore,
he can take
Mr.
care
Forbes
of himself,
isn't even
Steve.
sweating, so sit down.
Quickly, Steve, Mr. Forbes. The Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates drastically before, not just the early 2000s. The late 1990s, we had a boom. The early 1990s. I can probably, if I look back, if I could still had the memory I had only 10 years ago, find a couple of other incidents.
All right,
why didn't we have a great housing boom? Why didn't we have a collapse and a near depression then?
Well, it's all a matter of proportion. Yes, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates in the 1990s, but not on the scale that they did in 2000. We did not have over a year, for example, of 1% of federal funds rate. That was a brand new thing. And that was artificial, nothing to do with the market. So if you look at the Federal Reserve in the in the past times, sometimes when the Fed has lowered interest rates artificially, like the early 1970s, was because it was printing excess money and setting the stage for horrors down the road, as happened in 1974 and 75. So yes, the Fed has made, this wasn't the first time the Fed has made mistakes, but what compounded what the Fed did this time were mistakes made on things like mark-to-market accounting, short selling, inconsistent reactions by the government, which, Hank Paulson is the James Buchanan of Treasury Secretaries with what he did.
All right,
I get one last question.
Yes, you do.
Mr. Forbes. I know you've never seen a tax cut you didn't love. But I know you don't like some government statistics over others, but we had the fastest economic growth in the 1950s and 1960s, and the fastest rise in median household income, and lots of new products in the 1950s and 1960s, and taxes were very high, weren't they?
The overall tax burden in the 50s and 60s was far lower than it was today. And also, you didn't have massive property taxes as we do today. And on income taxes, while the rates were high, most people didn't hit those high brackets. And Social Security taxes, you have to include them, were infinitely lower than they are today. But in the late 50s, as prosperity people started moving to the higher tax brackets, the U.S. economy started to suffer severe recessions. We had a mild one in 1954. We had a tough one in 1958, another one in 1960, which is why John Kennedy put in a proposal to cut income tax rates 28% across the board. They're ultimately passed. He was right. I wish the Democratic Party would learn from John Kennedy.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. I said thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Marshall? Where's my marshal? Okay. Mr. Moore, your next witness, please.
I would like to call, Your Honor, Mr. Doug Casey.
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey, would you please place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So help me God?
Help you God.
But which God?
Okay, Mr. Casey,
boy.
I have here a copy of Atlas Shrugged. Would you please place your left hand on Atlas Shrugged? Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you Ayn Rand?
You'll have to take my word for it.
All right, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Casey, thank you so much for being here today. The prosecution is trying to make the case that it was the failure of free market economics that caused this economic crisis. You were a long-standing student and lecturer and writer on American financial economic history. I'd like to ask you this question, sir. Do you see any evidence that it was the breakdown of free market policies that caused the financial panic that we've seen in the last 18 months?
Well, that's a false, even ridiculous question, in that we don't have a free market in this country, and we haven't, even since the founding of the country, as you pointed out. What we have today is not capitalism, so capitalism can't be on trial. What we have is fascism. Fascism is a system, let me define the word, where individuals and companies own the property, but the government directs it. So that's the answer to your question.
I don't understand what...
So if I understand you, sir, we can't blame the free market system for our economic failures right now because we don't have a free market
That's
system.
exactly correct.
All right. The next question I wanted to ask you. You are an investment guru, is that right, sir? You've provided a lot of good advice to people. Would you advise the American people or investors to invest in Chrysler or General Motors today?
Was that a yes or a no?
Look, what we're facing right now is not just the most serious depression or
Is it a yes or a no?
No.
Okay.
No, you're looking at something. This isn't the most serious thing since the 1930s. This is the most serious thing since the founding of the country. So, no, I couldn't recommend common stocks. I couldn't recommend bonds. I can't recommend the U.S. dollar. No, none of these things.
Do you think that the United States government did the right thing when it bailed out AIG?
Not only did it do not the right thing, it did exactly the opposite of the right thing.
Did it do the right thing when it bailed out Bear Stearns?
No, it should
Did
have
it
let
do
it
the right
collapse.
thing when it bailed out the 12 largest banks in the United States?
Look, I don't even acknowledge the right of the U.S. government to exist.
Do you believe that the $800 billion...
Wait a second.
Wait
a second. I'm beginning to take this very personally.
Do you believe that this man should be the mayor of Las Vegas?
I'm giving you your Miranda warnings now. You have a right to remain silent, okay?
Listen, personally, you seem like a very nice guy, but you ought to get honest work.
Do you believe, sir, that we need mayors and governors?
No, I don't. I think that anything that needs doing will be done by
shoot
entrepreneurs
this
in the
man.
market. And if entrepreneurs don't provide the good or service, then it's not desired by the market. So no, the answer is no. We don't.
So
need
what
that.
you're saying, sir, is that the citizens of Las Vegas could save a lot of money if this man did not have a job.
Yes.
Well, wait.
Yes, and
Wait,
the
please.
50,000 people that work for him.
That's assuming facts, not in evidence.
It sounds like the wrong person is on trial here.
Well, Dignam used to mess. This is all due respect, this is a kangaroo court. Any court that could have the nerve to put capitalism on trial for the sins of another system is a kangaroo court by definition.
Well, I want the record to reflect that through your entire testimony, you've had your hand on the Bible.
That's like crossing my fingers, if you would.
One last question, if I may, sir. Do you believe that this man has the right to put you in jail?
Oh, don't challenge me.
No, I don't. It's going to take an explanation that we don't have time for, but no. And not believing in the state or government or what it does, no, I don't.
So if we had, to summarize, if we had a very limited government, or no government at all, we would be a richer country.
Oh, absolutely. This country would be already right now at the level of Star Trek if we didn't have the government. I mean, to me, the thing I'm most amazed by...
Even if Barack Obama is president?
Oh,
All right.
I'm just amazed that we're as prosperous as we still are with the dead hand of the state laying upon all the citizens of this country.
Do you believe, sir, finally, that Barack Obama is the Messiah?
Judge, I object.
Did you say the Messiah or the Antichrist?
I would like the defense to ask
I rest my
at
case,
least
sir.
one serious question.
All right. Cross-examine. Mr.
One
Madrick.
serious question. Sir, thank you. Appreciate
I'm
your-
trying to treat this proceeding with all the dignity it deserves.
And we actually, because we're probably more open-hearted than you, will treat you with even more dignity. But let me ask you this. Is America a prosperous country?
Yes, in
Is it
relative
the most
terms. In
prosperous
relative
country?
terms, yes.
The most prosperous country in the world?
For the last 30 years, based mostly upon the kindness of strangers in China and so forth, yes.
How long have you been predicting depressions in America?
Oh, that's very easy to predict. Any time that you have...
But when did you start?
About 1978.
When was this book published?
1978.
Yeah, I was looking at it. You were talking about how regulation, inflation, and so forth would lead to depression.
Yes, inevitably.
We licked inflation. We deregulated at least to some degree. Well, I feel like Frank Sinatra. We licked inflation. We deregulated. And then we have something you call the worst economic calamity in American history. Even though we reversed some of those conditions you worried about much in this book.
When are you talking about?
Inflation. Now. Or did I misunderstand you?
No,
Didn't you just say this is
that was a cyclical recovery. And all I can tell you is that in the real world, actions have consequences, cause has effect. And regulation, inflation, and the government in general has brought us to where we are now, and it's going to get much, much worse.
So we've been a very prosperous country. Everybody on the jury believes we're quite an extraordinary country, prosperous, full of economic opportunity. And we did this despite the fact that we have a government, any kind of government.
That's right.
And if we didn't have any kind of government, we'd be even more prosperous.
Vastly more prosperous.
Is there one historical example you can point to make your case? Just one. One example of a nation without a government that became very prosperous.
I'll say this. It's that every time and without exception, the richest and most prosperous countries in the world are the countries that have had the lightest touch of government. In the past, that's been the United States. So that's why we're as prosperous as we are now. We would be much more prosperous had we not had the government.
I don't want to get into statistical analysis, but And in fact, I won't. I'm not even going to bother to argue that last question.
Statistics, of course.
Yeah, I know that you'll just say those statistics are no good. I guess you'll just say that if I bring that up. If we got rid of government, and I always talk about Sweden, but let me talk about it in a different country. If we got rid of government in Norway, which is almost as rich as we are in GDP per capita, maybe even richer, and they pay for child care, and university is free, and they pay for health care, and they don't have 47 million people, or the equivalent proportion, without health care insurance. If we eliminated government in Norway, wow, would they be way richer than we are?
Yes, they would, because what government does is it misallocates huge amounts of capital, and it causes distortions in the marketplace. So, yes, the Norwegians would be far better off without their government.
So we have achieved this state against all odds. We have achieved this state of prosperity in America against all odds.
America's been relatively free compared to the other countries in the world. That's correct.
Does a government have to protect property rights, the minimal necessary requirement to make a market work?
Look, if you're going to have a government, it should do three things: protect you from criminals within its bailiwick, criminals from which is a police force, criminals from without, which is an army, and have a court system so you can adjudicate disputes without resorting to violence.
I'll stipulate to that.
Yeah, so if the government did those three things, I could live with that. Unfortunately, even those three things are far too important to a civil society to be left to the kind of people that generally go into government, present company excluded.
Mr. Madrick, can you wind up?
I rest.
Good.
Thank you, sir.
Mr.
All right, thank you
I would request a redirect.
No
I
redirect.
request a redirect.
No redirect. Have a seat. Have a seat.
You don't have authority over me.
Thank you.
You know, you may never get to the jury. All right, does the defense rest?
Defense rests, sir.
I understand reluctantly, but you do rest. All right, I appreciate that.
Not reluctantly.
All right.
But I want to make a closing statement, sir.
Absolutely. But since Mr. Madrick has the burden of proof, you'll go first.
Oh, I didn't
And
know that was...
we're going to really hold you to a strict timetable. 5-minute limit. I'll cut you off right on the button. No warnings.
No warnings.
5 minutes. No. Justice Holmes once said, if I had more time, I would have made it more brief. So, do it.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I again urge you to rid yourself of your previous prejudices and the outcries from the gallery. Although I must say I enjoyed the gallery. We have heard a great deal of rhetoric from the other side. We have heard virtually no analysis. We have heard about basketball players. We have heard about the fact that there's not a free market in Ethiopia. Could you ever start a Whole Foods in Ethiopia? Well, even I would agree it's probably pretty difficult. Not as difficult maybe as Las Vegas. Is that analysis? Have we heard from the other side at all about the mispricing of assets on Wall Street? And we've talked about government and Fannie Mae. I agree Fannie Mae contributed to this problem. But are they the central issue? Not remotely. Just look at the numbers, and I know when I bring up numbers, people just say, oh, I don't like those numbers. Let me tell you about a few other numbers. Just look at the numbers in purchases. And the Community Reinvestment Act, I'm surprised that didn't come up, had almost nothing to do with this crisis. 3 Republican appointees stated as much after they actually did the research. I would commend the jury. I would commend my opponent. I would commend the gallery. And, Judge, I don't have to bother to commend you because I know you did do this. Do some research into these issues. Ask yourself why infrastructure in America is rated a D. This is America, rated a D by the civil engineers. Ask yourself why it is so darn expensive to go to college in America. Does that make sense to you? Ask yourself why public education is unequal. You probably have. You may have some answers. We would probably disagree. Ask yourself, though, who made public education work in America? Steve, my opponent, brought up one point, and I want to make this very clear. He said big government always gets in the way, or something like that. Let me point this out to you historically. There is no example of a major rich nation today that has not had something we can define as a big government. Some very big governments. And I know many of you think life is not as good in France or Sweden as it is here. Don't tell that to the Swedes or the French. They know the services they get, and they know their country's been prosperous. I'm not saying they do everything right, and I'm not saying by any means government does everything right in America. But it is time to get some balance in this argument. What's happened to America is that we've lost our sense of balance. We've been dominated by an extreme ideology, an ideology that has taken us much too far. And you see an example of that today. You see an example of it, where everything that has happened is government's fault. Not some of it, but all of it. Where you use examples about free markets, examples like Ethiopia, instead of examples like Western Europe. Can you start a company in China today? Increasingly you can. A company in India and America better wake up to that fact. They better wake up to the fact that other systems that regulate more, that pay for education and have more efficient healthcare systems, are going to start becoming much more competitive economically than we are. And we better start taking care of ourselves. And I'm not going to become an ideologue. I'm not going to tell you people, I'm certainly not going to tell the jury, I'm not going to even tell this woman who keeps laughing, that the only answer, I always remember this line from Sinatra. It's a horrible line, but he said, "Sir, take your hand off that broad." We're in Las Vegas, I can say that.
Yes, and
right?
what happens here stays here.
We better take care of ourselves, and I'm not going to become an ideologue. I'm not going to come up here and use LeBron James as an example, or Ethiopia, or tell you Fannie Mae did it all and distort the numbers, or tell you everything is bad about private enterprise. Not remotely. I'm going to tell you we better get some balance in America, and we've lost that. We've lost that, and the consequence of losing that has been a severe economic cataclysm that we didn't need. We didn't need to become, who brought up the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union, please, Charles. Let's not jump from one extreme to the other. I'm not talking about the Soviet Union. But we need some balance here. We did not need this cataclysm. And everybody on this jury is paying the price for that. And if we don't have government, Mr. Forbes, Steve, who I feel, since he is my neighbor, I can call Steve, Judge. If we don't have government intervening, economies go down farther and farther and farther. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the New Deal, the categorical statement that the New Deal didn't work. We don't have time, and I hope we have another debate, Judge, and I hope you're presiding. Thank you.
Mr. Madrick. Thank you very much. Mr. Moore?
Your Honor, it's been a pleasure to be here with you. I like you, but I do not love you, and I'm not going to hug you. I think that
Thank God. Notwithstanding your position.
I would beseech the jury to think about this. Please, I beg you, do not kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. That goose that lays the golden eggs is the free market capitalist system. It's the reason that the United States has become the richest nation on earth. Now let's review some of the evidence that the prosecuting team has brought today. First, he said executive compensation. The free market system isn't working because of a lot of executives are overpaid. I agree that many executives, especially of failing institutions, Mr. Gasparino had this correct, many of them should not be paid anything. They should not get golden parachutes. They should give the money back if they cause their companies to go into bankruptcy. But this was not a failure, as all of the witnesses agreed. This was not a failure of the free market system. It was a failure of the compensation boards of directors that should be overseeing the interests of the shareholders. Next, the case was made, by the way, I agree with the prosecuting attorney. He says we have lost our balance between the free market system and government. He is exactly right. We have lost the proper balance. And the reason we've lost the proper balance is we have seen in the last 18 months the greatest expansion of government in the history of this country. We've spent $800 billion on a failed government stimulus plan that has not created one single new job and has caused the unemployment rate to go up to 9.5%. Where is the evidence that all this infrastructure creates jobs? The prosecuting attorney said, well, we don't have a good education and health care system in this country. I agree. We do not have a good education and health care system in this country. Who runs those industries? The government does. The two industries in America that are most dysfunctional, education and healthcare. Education is 90% run by the government, and the healthcare system is 50% run by the government. Now, the prosecuting attorney and his friends in Washington, like Barack Obama, want that entire industry, the healthcare industry, to be run by government. Now, I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if we have the government running our healthcare system in America, it will have all of the efficiency of the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Postal Service. We don't want that. Our health is too important. Now, infrastructure. The prosecuting attorney said that we are not spending enough money on infrastructure. The problem is with infrastructure in this country, and you're right, a lot of our infrastructure is crumbling. Why? Because these dingbat politicians spend millions of dollars every year on bridges to nowhere. Get the government out of infrastructure, and we will have a much better system of roads, bridges, and highways. Finally, I would submit, that if you look at countries around the world, let us not emulate the model that the prosecuting attorney says that he so much admires in his book, The Case for Big Government. He wants the United States to look like Europe. He has what I call Euro envy. He wants us to look like France and Germany and Italy and Spain and Sweden. There's a problem with that model, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't work. Those countries have had higher unemployment rates. They have more people in poverty. They have not created jobs. The United States, under the free enterprise system from 1980 to 2007, created 46 million new jobs. Over that same time period, Europe created 5 million new jobs. We created 9 times as many jobs as those countries did. We created much more wealth and so on. So the point I think I'm making is that our founding fathers set up a system that was ingenious. I am not making the case for no government. Mr. Casey made that case very impassionedly. I don't agree entirely with that. We do need a rule of law. We do need a court system. We do need roads. But we do, and we obviously need a national security system and a national defense. But we do not have to have the government meddling in every industry. And what has been the result, finally, of all of this government that we have seen emerge in the last 6 months under George Bush and Barack Obama? We are now leaving to our children our most precious assets. I think everyone in this room would agree that what we care most about is the future we leave to our children. For the first time in history, if we remain on the course that we are on right now, our children, thanks to $10 trillion of government debt that we will amass over the next 10 years under these big government policies that the prosecuting attorney so much admires. Under those policies, every American born, every child born today will inherit $150,000 to $200,000 of debt. I would submit, Your Honor, that this is fiscal child abuse. No great nation leaves that kind of debt to the... And so, system, we need to leave to our children and a burgeoning free market system that makes everybody rich. The great dream of America is not, as the prosecuting attorney